So I'm joined by Sam Reeves Hill. Sam is an amazing painter, visual artist, photographer, and a muralist. And Sam, we met at the opening of Ugly Art Co. Gallery last year, I think. Um, and I was really nervous. And me and you were kind of like gravitated towards each other. And we like instantly started talking about deep shit and astrology, and I just felt very comfortable and safe talking to you. And your art is very inspiring to me, and so I had to have you on the show. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Um, so you're one of the most prolific artists I know. You always have something going on. What is your creative practice like? What's that process like?
Um, for me, I guess I kind of describe it like a daily journal entry. I try to do something. I try to put something on paper, on canvas, even if it's not good. Like, you can always go back and cover it up or start again, but taking the first step of actually getting a little messy and doing something with my piles and piles of art, you
Mhm.
know? And I say that like it's always done well but it's not. And I knew that when you were having me on this, that this is what we were talking about. And I'm like, I always feel weird talking about my process because it is not a pretty thing,
Yeah.
Like it is sometimes a little messy, a little unorganized, and I really try to be consistent, but I'm not always consistent,
Mm.
And a lot of times it's kind of a brain dump of just my lack of, I don't know, preparation.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I like how you described it as a daily journal entry. Like, what do you do when there are days where you just like are in a funk and you don't want to do anything? How do you overcome that, or do you overcome that?
I I feel like I've gotten so much better at not procrastinating, but I've always kind of struggled with being a procrastinator.
Mm-hmm.
My mom always would joke about my sister and I. My sister, if there was a test in 2 weeks, she would start studying day one, and she would say that I would wait till the last day and hope it was canceled or pushed back.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a tendency to like need that external pressure, and I've really worked hard on doing better. I've not by any means overcome it, but I
Yeah.
definitely have moved in a better direction in that way, I guess. I also have moved some stuff from my studio into my home, and I
Mm.
think that helps too, because sometimes, like you get off work, you're doing all this stuff, and you don't always want to go to another location. So it's kind of helped me too to like bring some of it back into my space.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Just like live with the art.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about your mom. When I went to your show, you had a wall of sayings your mom said.
Mm-hmm.
How does your mom and your family in general inspire your art?
I am, I feel like I was surrounded by very creative women growing up who didn't necessarily look at what they were doing as creative. My mom has always been a reader and a doodler. Um, I have my maternal grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and a paternal step grandmother, and they were all very present. But both of my dad's mothers were painters. They both did landscape painting and some embroidery. And then my grandmother, on my mom's side, was always she sewed, she gardened, but then they were all like documenters. And I
Mm.
feel like, like there was, everybody had piles and piles of photos, and that kind of brings like, I don't know, just we don't have that anymore, like
Yeah.
now it's kind of like it's on our phone, but you don't have the physical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that brings a lot of inspiration as well.
Yeah.
But I was homeschooled until I was 15, so I was very much like in that window of like, you
Mm.
know my mother was very present in my life, and she is the same but different from me. Like we have a lot in common, but then we also have some polar opposite as well.
Yeah.
But yes, the mom-isms are, I'm always adding to them. When my
Yeah.
siblings remember something, I add it to the list. I'm like, we're putting that on paper because it's funny and entertaining and nostalgic. And
Yeah, and it's like some of the stuff that was on there was like very motivating, and it's like stuff you need to hear. So whenever you're making art, do you ever hear your mom's voice like telling you what does that sound like?
I feel like it is more so because she was a tough love parent. Like, you know, like it was kind of like I definitely learned later in life to have a little more of like a positive self-encouragement voice and not so hard on myself.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately there was like I think that she's always shown belief in that you can accomplish whatever you put your mind to, although she probably didn't envision me painting
Yeah.
or managing restaurants. I think that, you know, she's very proud of me pursuing something, even if it's a little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm blessed to have a very loving, close relationship with my parents, and so it's kind of like just having a sense of like security, I guess. Maybe it's more so like an energetic thing than it is like a voice. But yeah.
I love that. And one of my favorite paintings from your show was a painting inspired by your dad. That was very touching to me. And one of the things I loved about that painting was how textured, there were so many layers into that. And there's a lot of layers in your work. Tell me more about those layers and how you get to like the final image of the painting.
I feel like kind of going back to like the daily journal entry thing, like when I'm working on something, sometimes I overwork it. Sometimes I'm like, I've had one situation and I know I'm going off from that painting, but I have one painting where like I kind of like did it in like 45 minutes, and I'll never forget this. It was like 2018, like right when I was really starting to be like, okay, I've kind of found my style and I'm, you know, pursuing that. And I finished it. And then I was like, I did that too quick. Like, you know, I need to do more. And then I messed it up. And I was like, I have a picture of it from when I was like, it's done. And then I overworked it. And then I was like, I can never bring it back, you know, but like
Relatable.
I definitely feel like I've gotten to a point where I'm a little better at knowing when to stop. But then also the things can also never be done. I don't know, but I feel like with the paintings, with texture, with layers, I feel like, you know, like it's kind of like a nod to life, you know? I think it brings more humanity's not a good word, but like it kind of brings in a deeper, more I'm struggling finding the word, but you know,
I
like
know what you mean. There's like there's like a depth and like almost like a human touch to it that you can't really replicate. There's no like shininess to it, you know.
Yeah.
Is that
yes,
something
I
like
agree.
that?
I feel like too, I really leaned into like kind of like that abstract expressionism, you know, like that aesthetic more because I went through I feel like everybody, when you're young and you try to start drawing things true to life and then you're like, this doesn't look right. Like, you know, like, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's cool. Like, you know, like I think now I love imperfect things.
Me too.
I love good, bad art, you know, like I like it. But then, you know, like it kind of like, I was more discouraged, but now there's something about it that just has a, like I don't know, like a curiosity, you know?
And it's something that's never been seen before.
Yeah.
Which, when you're doing realism, it's like the technicality of it is fucking amazing. But like the thing about abstract expressionism, and I would consider myself an abstract artist too. It's like when I go about it, it's like I want to create something that's never been seen before. Tell me about the painting of your dad. What inspired you to do that?
So my dad is a bluegrass musician, I would say is the best way to describe it. He plays by ear. He's played since he was young. He can do the piano, the banjo, pretty much any stringed instrument, like a guitar. But he always had his same guitar case since he was in college, had all the stickers on it, and it was just like an anchor, like a memory anchor is something that I kind of went back to for this too, that I'm like jumping. But it was one of those things, like when I think of my dad, I think about that guitar case.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy when I'm painting something that has a true intention, and maybe not so much of just like a feeling or an energy, to put meaningful things into it. That's why, I'll get into that. I'm trying to stay focused because I'm like so ADHD. I'm like, let's
me
go
too.
down this
That's
road.
why I couldn't remember what I was gonna. It was so good, but it's gone now.
But he, my whole life, he always wore overalls. He was a staking engineer for the power company in the small town that I grew up in. He always had like a bandana in his pocket, like to wipe his glasses. And so it was just kind of little things that really made me reflect and think of him. And it was special too because like back to my kind of families, we had like those 90s landscape paintings, like prints in the house, like it was nothing abstract. It was all very like you knew what it was, technical, and so there's always been, since I kind of leaned more into the abstract style, a lack of understanding maybe, or just not fully like I don't want to say appreciation, because I think that they knew that what I was doing was, they liked it, but like it wasn't like what they would put in their home. And it was something about being able to show them a different perspective. I feel like doing my style, but with things that were important and meaningful to my family, it kind of like opened their eyes a little bit to like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Like it kind of brought some, I guess, more perspective on what I was doing.
Yeah, it being like autobiographical. I remember what I was going to ask you about, like the technicality of drawing and when you first start out. So I started out as an art major, and I made it through drawing 2, and my art teacher held up this like beautiful drawing, colorful drawing, and she was like, "This is a C-." Basically trying to scare people away, and it worked on me. I got scared because I'm not a drawer. I love abstract stuff. I like weird textures and gritty textures. So with abstract art and like not having this technical ability, were there any instances in your art where you were like, I kind of want to give up? Are there any struggles that get in your way of creating?
I can imagine nobody ever wondering if they should just give up.
Yeah.
But I think like my background was in graphic design.
Right.
That's where I like, and so I think I really kind of did a jump a little bit, because it was I guess the best way that I could really describe it is I was playing college basketball. Basketball was was my main dream, I think, from a young age. I was like, I want to continue playing.
That's one of my favorite things about you is you play basketball.
Yeah, thank you. But, like it was kind of like, I didn't think about what I would do after college. Like it was kind of like, that was what I wanted to do. I really wanted to continue playing. And life just, it didn't work out, and that's okay. But I think when that happened, it was almost like ego death. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like it was like, for so long I had some intrinsic value or like strength, that's just being like, I'm a successful, good basketball player. And then that was like, it's no longer there. And then you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? And I was really kind of coming out of just like a low energy mental health state. And I was just like, you know what if money didn't matter, what would I want to do? Like, ultimately, what would I want to do? And like basketball is no longer a thing. Like, and I just was like, I want to paint. And that was just like I'd never really admitted it to myself or just out loud. And some of the stuff that I did right off the bat. It's so funny because like you see kind of little things that I do now, but I have my sister has a painting, one of the first ones that I did when I was like actually putting paint on canvas in a way that wasn't a class where I had like a lesson and there was something you had to do for an assignment, and then one of my cousins also commissioned me to do a painting when I said that that's what I wanted to do, and it's just funny to kind of see the growth from there to now, but also just I feel like I went on a tangent again.
No, you're doing great.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes me think like, how do you think you've changed as a person since you admitted to yourself that you're an artist and you've taken it on full force? What have you seen change in you?
I think that I feel like I've always kind of had an appreciation for like little things, and I think honestly, it feels like kind of going back to a childhood version of myself.
Yes.
You know, again, being homeschooled, I was outside a lot. I was able to be creative and kind of. My mom was like a no TV, no video games, nothing battery operated.
Jealous.
Not that strict, but like it was like she wanted us to be self-entertained and like go outside and so I feel like it's kind of brought me back to that a little bit.
Yeah, and when you were a kid, were you a creative kid? What were you drawn to as a kid?
Yeah, I was a lot of coloring pencils and markers. That like I laugh about that too because I really never painted until college because they hated messes. Like it was like there was no glitter, there was no like like it was kind of like it was coloring pencils were cool, crayons were cool, markers were cool, but I was like we didn't really have paint in the house and but it was very much like we had sketchbooks and my mom is a collector of books. Like I still get that from her a little bit. But in our like playroom growing up, my dad built bookshelves. So it looked like a library, and we would thrift a lot and she would always pick up drawing books. She still to this day picks up drawing books for me and art books.
That's sweet.
It's really sweet. So she is always on the lookout for like anything art related and, typography, graphic design, anything. She's like, does this look good? And I'm like, it does. And she's like, I got it. So
nice. You're like teaching your mom like your perspective. I love that. Another thing you do that's really cool is you do murals. What got you into that and how did that start?
I think it was just something that I was like, because I love painting big, and it's not always easy to paint big because it's not necessarily something that can fit everywhere, like it's like even now the painting for my dad, I was like I want to give it to him, but he was like I don't know where we would put it, it's like it's a big painting, but for the murals it was kind of like okay, I get to paint as big as I want, like that's fun. My first one was for the Balinese Ballroom downtown, and I had no idea what I was doing. No I was just like, I'm going for it, And then I also made the mistake of doing it when it was cold outside. And I will never do that again. I learned my lesson. But I was like so excited to have the opportunity. I didn't want to be like, we're waiting till spring. So I did it in December and I was so cold. But it took me it probably took me too long because I didn't know at the time. And I am not really a planner. I will say I'm now become more of a planner. But I usually just start putting paint on canvas until something shows. And that was how I went about the first mural. Now it's like I sketch it out on my iPad, take a picture of the wall, see how everything's going to fit instead of just being like, I'm putting this out of my brain, pulling it out of my brain and putting it out there.
Mock-ups.
Yes. Yeah. So, but yeah, I feel like it's, just a fun way to get outside too, and but also just do something large. I love that. I eventually want to work up to murals. Like the largest I've painted is on like 72 by 48, so eventually I want to get bigger. But switching like gears completely,
So when we first met, we talked about astrology.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if astrology inspires your work or inspires you as a person. Like, how does astrology fit into your life? I love hearing people talk about astrology.
I really didn't get into astrology as much until 2016.
Mm-hmm.
My family is very religious, and they were like, we don't do this.
Yeah.
And so we just never, but then I kind of started getting into it and learning more about how, you have all the planets, and, there's different signs in each planet, and that's why this Aries might not be like this Aries, and stuff like that. I could see how astrology could inspire me, but it's almost like it's a better way of how I understand myself now,
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where it's and it sounds kind of silly, but even I can get, when I'm emotional, I can get very intense, and I don't mean to, but it's I feel it, it's happening, and I have an Aries moon.
I was about to say, that sounds like Aries.
Yeah. And it's after learning about it, it was kind of oh, that's just kind of a little, a little blip of understanding and self-forgiveness, because sometimes you're why am I so pissed off right now? I don't know, but I don't know, I think it's interesting. I think it's cool that it's a snapshot of the sky on the day that you were born, and I think so many people look at it like it's a horoscope, or the 90s or 2000s magazines that would have all the horoscopes in the back, and it's I guess, but it's not the same,
Yeah.
and it's more so just an ancient practice of
so many years and study has gone into it, and it also it offers you a chance to stop and pause and do self-reflection, because you can read descriptions of what each sign does and be like, that's not really me, or that is me. So you're really kind of narrowing down what your personality is. And, when you talk about it with other people, you really get to learn about someone on a deeper level, because you're not just talking about the weather. You're talking about oh, what do I do when I'm angry type stuff. So I love that.
I think it's cool too, because it's I feel like it's Aries, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Gemini. They all have a really bad rap.
I'm two of those.
Astrologically.
Yeah.
But I think it's so funny, because it's ultimately there's underdeveloped and mature versions of every sign, and I feel a lot of times people are they just all assume that it's all the bad. I'm but there's beautiful things about those as well. So
yeah. I love it. And speaking along the lines of that, knowing yourself, are there any habits that you do personally that give you the energy to do these daily journaling or daily artistic reflections?
I have always been a journaler, had a diary. I've gotten, I don't know, I think it's funny because I always had one, but I either threw them away or hid them so well that I couldn't find them as an adult.
Yeah.
As a kid, but I was terrified that somebody was going to read them, because I was I've always it's something so such a release to just put down stuff that's I can't, I don't want to say this out loud to my mom, but I just need to get this out,
Yeah.
And even now it's things that are silly that might make me upset, and it's something about just writing it down, and it's it frees up more space in your brain,
Externalizing it.
And I think there was a book, it's called The Artist Way, and
Don't even get me started on Artist Way.
Excuse me.
She should pay me at this point, as much as I talk about it to people.
It's such a good book, and I am not perfect. I don't do my morning pages every day, but I do make an effort, and I really think it's interesting to see the way you feel when you do it versus when you don't do it.
Yeah.
And
it makes a huch difference.
Yeah.
Do you still play basketball?
I still play basketball.
Yeah.
I play in summer leagues, so I haven't really this spring. I used to work out really consistently. I'm trying to establish a practice in that way. I feel like it was, for so long I was active, and I guess like it wasn't like a vanity thing. It was like I wanted to be the best athlete I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And now like I'm not playing basketball, and like what I'm working on currently is rewiring the way that I think about it to like I'm getting better for my health, you know, because it's
Exactly.
like instead of just being, because you know, like it inspired me to wake up early and go to the gym and do things because it was like there's a vision of, you know, you wanted a successful season, you know, like you wanted to be healthy, like, you know, but I think like I it's I, it is not as easy for me to self-motivate without that being the final goal. Obviously, I feel better after I do it.
Yeah.
But
Always. It's like, oh, science is actually right. Like,
yeah.
it does help with your mental health.
Yeah.
Which gives you creative energy.
Yeah.
So back to the artist way. We'll talk about it briefly because I could do a whole podcast about it.
Mm-hmm.
What was that process like for you? Why did you want to do the artist way?
I feel like it just makes sense. I think when I read it, I was like, this makes sense. But I've also read like books like Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, and things like that. And to me, it feels like if you write it down, I feel like writing something down already is like a subconscious message to your brain, you know?
Yes.
And I think that with the artist way, what is unique versus other journaling practices is that it's just like you just write whatever comes to mind, and even if nothing comes to mind, like you just like nothing is coming to my mind, you know, like just write it over and over, just like get it, like, but it's like, you know, until that's done, just do it. And I think that kind of relieves some pressure of again, like perfectionism, or like being like, this needs to be a certain way, because I love to like make things need to be a certain way, you know. And for that, it's like it just kind of removes the excuses, really, because it's like it just keep going, you know, until you fill up 3 pages. And
and it like it trains you to sit down and to just do something. And that's what I really love about it. And like you said, you're not perfect with it. I'm not perfect with it either. I only do like 1.5 pages, because 3 pages, I'm like, this will take me 30 minutes.
I got a smaller notebook.
Yeah.
Because at first I had a very large notebook. I was like, this is taking me an hour.
Yeah. I don't have time in the morning for all that. So this is my favorite question to ask artists, but what would be your dream project? If you had all the resources in the world, what would you want to do?
Honestly, I feel like if I had all the resources in the world, I would love to do. I've always looking at residencies. I haven't applied to any yet, but like I've always wanted to travel.
Same.
And I've always like, I think it would be so fun to just be somewhere, just like beautiful architecture, beautiful scenery, and like as many supplies as my heart desires, and a giant canvas. Like I want to do something like 20 feet tall. Like, you know, like I love the even thought of just like having the canvas on the ground, because I do a lot of the times my paintings are on the ground and I like kind of walk around them and look that way.
Yeah.
And then they rotate a lot. Like, you know, like there's a lot of movement for the canvas in the process, but I don't know. I'll say like Basquiat is one of my, like I've seen some of like the things that he did and how large. And when I was in New York, I got to go to the MoMA, and just seeing how big it is, and in your face, like, you know, like it's just like, I don't know, larger than life. And I think that that's a really fun way to be creative. Like, you know, like it's like the small paintings are fun and nice, but it's also like, I feel like it's like I need more room, you know, like it's like I want to just, I don't know. I feel like that was a horrible way to describe it. But
no,
yes.
It makes sense. Yeah. Like with abstract expressionism, it is about movement. It's about not necessarily being literal. It's just like, you know, when you're doing it, you might have a mood which makes your hand move faster, or that's what I learned a lot about that from this book called Ninth Strength Women, and it's about the women in the abstract expressionism movement, like after the First World War. And I got to learn, it's like Lee Krasner, Helen Frankenfurter, but it goes in behind like how abstract expressionism work. And I highly recommend it.
I would love to.
It's a good
Check
book.
it out.
Yeah.
When you do your morning pages or when you write, like, do you notice like your handwriting change based off kind of like your mood?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's so funny. I don't know. I was thinking about that because you said like the energetic shift of painting, but it's like it looks like 4 different people wrote here. Like like it's like
Yeah.
what is going on?
Yeah.
But
This morning I noticed because like the sun was coming in, like I felt really good, and like I was like sitting up straight and like.
My
I felt
handwriting
like,
is pretty.
Yeah, it was really pretty and elegant, and I was like, today is a beautiful day. But I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I can't wait to see what you do, and especially with Ugly, us being connected to that, I feel like that's a very special thing.
It is.
So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.